Hey, this is Joe with PreSonus. With Studio One version 6.2, we've added some cool new features to the way takes and layers work in Studio One. So I grew up on Pro Tools. I learned how to do audio production on Pro Tools systems. That was just Studio One didn't exist. And one of the requests that we've gotten over the years is if we could make the way our layers and comping system works, if we could make that have a little more similarity to the way it's done in Pro Tools. And with version 6.2, that's here. So if you're not familiar with the way takes and layers work in Studio One, we have a vocal track here. So this is our main vocal track. And if you look on the bottom left-hand side of this channel, you'll see there's two tiny little buttons here. And one of those expands layers. I recommend getting a keyboard shortcut for this. What you do is open up Preferences, go to Keyboard Shortcuts, just type in the word layer or layers, and you'll see expand layers is one of the functions inside of Studio One. And we can assign that to a keyboard shortcut. I'm using Control L for that. You can use whatever you want. So when I press Control L, it opens up, see those little layers open up down below? It opens up these layers and just toggles whether they're open or closed. So this is where all my takes go. So in Pro Tools, they're called playlists. In Studio One, they're called layers, and they show up in a couple of places. If we use our Command L feature, they show up down beneath, but they also show up here. If we press F4 to open up the inspector, we can see our layers here. So we can always switch between layers up here by choosing the layer that we want, or we can expand them out and see the different layers that we have. Now, none of this I've shown you yet is new. This is all just the normal feature of Studio One. So if I wanted to, let's say, bring my comp track to the top, making it the active layer, then I could come through and I could say I want a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this. So this is just the way Studio One has comped for years, and it's delightful. It's wonderful. In fact, Studio One even adds the crossfades into it, which is super handy because of course you're going to want to crossfade these. So super handy way of comping. That's not new, but what a lot of people asked was, hey, when I've got these things split out, sometimes I want to do something like take this piece of audio and move it over here. Or there are sections that I want to delete, but I can't. In previous versions of Studio One, the only real thing you could do here is select what you want to use for your comp track. You couldn't really select anything else. And the only way to be able to do anything, like if I want to edit these edits here on this Vox 2, really the only way to do that would be to click this up arrow, which promotes Vox 2 to the active layer, and then I can come in and I can, drag things around and move things and whatnot. But historically, you couldn't do that down here. Well, now you can. So now, if you hold down Command on the Mac or Control on the PC, the cursor just becomes what it normally is on other regions in Studio One. So up here, if I hover over the top half of the region, this is if you have your setup like this, where the arrow tool is selected here and you've got this selected, which means on the top half of a region of an event, it becomes the Arrange tool, and on the bottom half, it becomes the Selector arrow tool. If that's all set up, now if I'm looking at layers here, I've expanded my layers. By default, it's got this tool here, right, which is for selecting which ones we want to comp. But if we hold down Command on the Mac, Control on the PC, now we can treat this just like a normal piece of audio. So we can come in here, we can say this is a terrible take, I never want to have this take available. We can delete that from the layer itself. We can take a section that we really like and then we want to move, and we can move that around. So we basically have access to all of the editing tools that we want. If we want to do that same move, I've selected it, I'm dragging it, I'm holding down Control or Command on the Mac. If I hold down Option or Alt on the PC, it now brings in that little green plus sign, which means it's going to copy what's underneath there. So we just basically allowed you to have what you wanted, which was the ability to do normal editing inside of the layers in Studio One. We've also added a couple of new preferences that you can toggle on or off depending on how you want your workflow to look. If we come into Preferences here and go to Advanced and under Editing, you'll see two new checkboxes here. One, expand layers after recording takes, and the other is track/channel names follow the active layer. So the first one is pretty self-explanatory. When I'm recording takes, so doing like loop record, once it's done, it goes ahead and expands those layers. That's what everybody wants to do when they loop record. Pretty much, but we've given you the option to turn that on or off. So if I'm loop recording a 4-bar guitar solo and I record 12 takes of that on loop record, as soon as I stop recording, as soon as I stop playback, it's going to expand those layers. So I'm going to check that because that's what I want. So then I can go through and do my comping right away. It's one less key press, one less thing you have to do, which is nice. But we give you the option. It's off by default, so if you want this to be your new behavior, come and check this. And then the second one, track/channel names follow active layer. Let's turn that on and I'll show you what that looks like. This is another thing we borrowed from Pro Tools because the way, if I was using, let's see, this is our track here. And if I want to, like right now we're looking at the comp layer, but if I want to look at vocal 1 layer, it starts to get confusing which layer I'm looking at. So if I have this closed, I can see just by the name here, and that little arrow kind of signifies this, that this is layer 1. The overall channel name actually changes depending on what layer we have selected. So if we stay in this view, we switch it to Vox 2, it changes to Vox 2. If we switch it to the comp track, it now says comp. So what does that mean? That means you need to be probably a little more cognizant of how you name your layers moving forward, because it's gonna, if you have this setting engaged, it's gonna change the name of your track. Some people have been asking for that. It's just a way of them kind of keeping mental track of what's where, which ones have they comped yet, for example. If you have a bunch of tracks you need to comp and you're not sure which ones you've done. But in this instance, I would name this Vox Comp or something like that, so that it doesn't become just a bunch of tracks named comp. That would be really confusing. So that's something in my workflow I'll have to change. But now I know that I'm looking at my comp layer, even if I can't see any of my layers, right? I can literally just look at the track name and know, oh, okay, this has been comped. And we can click here to see the other layers, and we can actually access those. That's cool. I didn't realize that was there. We can access our different layers from right here, just clicking on that little blue arrow that pops up to the right of the name. That's super handy. So now we know, without having to open anything else, I can just look and see, oh, Vox Comp. Okay, that's the comp layer. And of course, the name changes here in the mixer as well. And the last thing, this feature here, the no overlap when editing events, that used to not apply to layers. It does now. So if you have something that's trailing off and it needs to overlap with the next take, you can set that up. It'll be present and available to edit inside of those layers as well. Confession, as much as I love a big release like Studio One version 4 or version 5, these dot releases, I think I like even more because they typically always come with a handful of really nice quality of life improvements that are either things that I've requested or things that I've wished we had or things I didn't know I needed, and now I see it and say, oh, that's really nice. So if you haven't played around with these features and haven't upgraded to version 6.2, go do that now. Happy comping. See you around.